Daniel Carter sat in his penthouse office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The envelope in his hands felt heavier than it should have. Thick, expensive cardstock with elegant gold calligraphy. He already knew what it was before he even opened it. The name on the front confirmed it, Mr. Daniel Carter, formal, impersonal, as if they hadn't once been engaged. He slid his finger under the flap, tearing it open with more force than necessary. The invitation inside was just as lavish as he expected. Sophia Montgomery and Alexander Kensington request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration. His jaw tightened. Sophia, his ex-fiancée, the woman who had looked him in the eye 2 years ago and said, "I love you, Daniel, but love doesn't pay for the life I deserve." And just like that, she was gone into the arms of a man whose net worth dwarfed his own. Now she was rubbing it in his face. This wasn't just a wedding invitation. It was a taunt. A reminder that in her world, money was the ultimate measure of success, and by that metric, Alexander Kensington had won. Daniel tossed the invitation onto his desk, running a hand through his hair. He should decline. He should ignore it. But the thought of Sophia smirking, thinking he was too weak to show up, burned in his chest. No, he would go, and he would make damn sure she regretted sending him that invitation. The homeless woman later that evening, Daniel walked down the street, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored coat. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bit at exposed skin, but he barely felt it. His mind was still stuck on that damn invitation. He passed by a small cafe, the warm glow of its interior spilling onto the sidewalk. That was when he saw her. A woman sat huddled against the brick wall, a thin blanket draped over her shoulders. Her dark skin was weathered by time and hardship, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. A cardboard sign rested at her feet. "Anything helps. God bless." People walked past her without a glance, lost in their own worlds. But for some reason, Daniel stopped. Maybe it was the way she held herself, not begging, not pleading, just sitting there with a quiet dignity. Or maybe it was the fact that, tonight, he felt just as invisible as she must have. He crouched down, pulling out his wallet. "Cold night to be out here," he said, handing her a 20. She looked up, her brown eyes sharp, despite the exhaustion lining her face. "Every night's cold when you don't got a roof," she replied, taking the money with a nod. "Thank you." There was something in her voice, resilience maybe, a strength that hadn't been completely worn down. Daniel hesitated. "What's your name?" She studied him for a moment, as if trying to figure out his angle. "Martha," she finally said. "Martha Johnson." He nodded. "Daniel." Silence stretched between them. He should have walked away, but something kept him there. "You got somewhere to be, Daniel?" Martha asked, her tone not unkind. He exhaled, the weight of the wedding invitation pressing on his mind. "Yeah," he muttered. "Unfortunately." She chuckled softly. "Sounds like you'd rather be anywhere else." He smirked. "You have no idea." The bold proposal. The idea hit him suddenly. A reckless, impulsive thought, the kind he usually dismissed immediately. But tonight, he didn't. "What are you doing this Saturday?" he asked. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Same thing I do every day, surviving." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "How would you like to go to a wedding?" She blinked. "Come again?" "A wedding," he repeated. "Black tie, fancy venue, free food, free drinks. All you'd have to do is show up." Martha stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You asking me out, rich boy?" He let out a short laugh. "No, I'm asking you to be my +1 to my ex-fiancée's wedding." Her expression shifted. Amusement, skepticism, then something almost like pity. "Let me get this straight. Your ex is marrying some other guy, and you want to show up with..." She gestured to herself. "Me?" Daniel shrugged. "Why not?" Martha shook her head, but there was a glint in her eye. "You're trying to piss her off." "Maybe." She let out a dry laugh. "That's messed up." "Yeah," he admitted. "But it's also a night in a warm place with good food, and I'll get you a dress, shoes, whatever you need." Martha was quiet for a long moment, then she sighed. You're serious, dead serious. She looked down at her worn-out clothes, then back at him. What's the catch? No catch. Just show up, play the part, and leave when you want. Martha exhaled, shaking her head again. But this time, she smiled. You know what? Fine. Why the hell not? Daniel grinned. Perfect. And just like that, the plan was set. Daniel Carter had spent the last 2 years building an empire to forget her. Sophia Montgomery, the woman who had looked him in the eye and told him he would never be enough. He had loved her once, fiercely, blindly, before realizing that love meant nothing, when weighed against the glittering promise of a wealthier man's name. The invitation had arrived that morning, hand-delivered by a courier in a crisp uniform. The thick, cream-colored envelope bore his name in swirling gold script, as if the sender took pleasure in the formality of it all. He had known this day would come. Sophia had made no secret of her engagement to Alexander Kensington, a man whose family owned half of Manhattan's real estate. The wedding was to be the social event of the season, a spectacle designed to showcase Sophia's triumphant ascent into true elite society. Daniel tossed the invitation onto his desk, the heavy paper landing with a soft thud. He should have thrown it away immediately, but pride, that stubborn, relentless thing, kept him from doing so. He couldn't let her think he was still broken over her. He couldn't let her win. His assistant, Emily, hovered in the doorway. Do you want me to RSVP your regrets? Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the armrest. No, he said after a pause. Tell them I'll be there. Emily hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Absolutely. The city was alive that evening, pulsing with the usual rhythm of hurried footsteps and honking cars. Daniel walked without a destination in mind, his hands buried in the pockets of his overcoat. He had told himself he wasn't going to the wedding out of lingering feelings. It was about pride, about proving to Sophia, to himself, that her betrayal hadn't destroyed him. And yet, the thought of walking into that ballroom alone, of enduring the whispers and the pitying glances, made his stomach twist. That was when he saw her. A woman sat against the brick exterior of a closed cafe, her knees drawn up to her chest. A frayed blanket was draped over her shoulders, and a cardboard sign rested at her feet. Anything helps. God bless. People streamed past her without a second glance, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. But something about her stillness, the quiet dignity in her posture, made Daniel pause. He crouched down, pulling a bill from his wallet. Rough night? She looked up, her dark eyes assessing him with a sharpness that took him by surprise. Ain't they all? Daniel handed her the money. I'm Daniel. She took it with a nod. Martha. There was a long silence. Daniel should have walked away, but the weight of the invitation in his pocket, the simmering anger beneath his skin, kept him rooted in place. You ever been to a fancy wedding, Martha? She let out a dry laugh. You kidding me? Daniel tilted his head. What if I told you I could get you into one? Martha's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. What's the angle? No angle, he said, though that wasn't entirely true. I've got a +1 to a high society event this weekend. All you'd have to do is show up. She studied him, her gaze piercing. And why would you want me there? Daniel hesitated. The truth was ugly, petty even. But something in Martha's eyes told him she'd see right through a lie. Because the bride is my ex, he admitted, and I want her to wonder. Martha let out a slow breath, shaking her head. You rich folks got some strange ways of dealing with heartbreak. Daniel smirked. So, you in? She looked down at her worn-out clothes, then back at him. You really think they'd let someone like me through the door? I don't care what they think, Daniel said. I'm paying for the whole thing. You'll have a dress, shoes, whatever you need. Martha was silent for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she grinned. You know what? Sure. Let's see how the other half lives. Daniel extended a hand. Deal. She shook it, her grip firm. Deal. Over the next few days, Daniel threw himself into the plan. He arranged for Martha to stay in a luxury suite at one of his hotels, hired a stylist to oversee her transformation,
and ensured she would want for nothing. The morning of the wedding, he received a call from his stylist. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." There was a pause. "Well, just so you know, she cleans up good." When Martha stepped out of the hotel elevator that evening, Daniel almost didn't recognize her. The woman who stood before him was radiant. Her dark hair had been styled into elegant waves, her makeup subtle but striking. The emerald green gown she wore hugged her curves in all the right places, the fabric shimmering under the lobby lights. Daniel let out a low whistle. "Martha," she smirked. "Told you I clean up nice." He offered his arm, ready to make an entrance. Martha took it, her chin lifting. "Let's give them a show." Daniel had expected Martha to be nervous. After all, she was stepping into a world far removed from the cold streets she had called home for years. But as the sleek black limousine glided through the city, she sat with an eerie calm, her gaze fixed on the passing lights. "You're quiet," he observed. Martha glanced at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "Just thinking about," she exhaled, smoothing the emerald fabric of her gown. "How easy it is for people like you to change someone's life for a night." Daniel frowned. "Is that a bad thing?" Martha didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the window again, watching the city blur past. "No, but it makes me wonder why more people don't do it." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Daniel shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable. He had brought Martha along as a statement, a way to unsettle Sophia. But now, faced with the reality of her life, his motives felt shallow. The limo turned onto Fifth Avenue, the venue's grand facade coming into view. Martha tensed slightly. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. Martha straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I do." The stylist had outdone herself. When Martha had first stepped into the hotel suite that morning, she had been wary, eyeing the racks of designer dresses and trays of jewelry with suspicion. The stylist, a petite woman named Lila, had clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, you're going to be stunning," she gushed. Martha had snorted. "Honey, I haven't been stunning in a long time." Lila ignored the self-deprecation, steering her toward the vanity. "Let's see what we can do." Hours later, Martha barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Her skin, once dulled by exhaustion and exposure, glowed under expertly applied makeup. The dark circles beneath her eyes had vanished, replaced by a subtle shimmer that made her brown eyes luminous. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical bun, cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders. But it was the dress that truly transformed her. The emerald gown hugged her curves like it had been made for her, the fabric rich and heavy against her skin. When she moved, the skirt shimmered, catching the light in a way that made her feel like royalty. Lila had teared up. "You look incredible." Martha had swallowed hard, blinking back unexpected moisture in her own eyes. "Yeah, I do." The limo came to a stop. Outside the venue loomed, its entrance flanked by uniformed staff and flickering lanterns. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted through the open doors. Daniel turned to Martha. "Last chance to back out." She met his gaze squarely. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, then stepped out of the car, offering her his hand. Martha took it, her grip steady. Together, they walked toward the entrance, heads turning as they passed. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria glittered under crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off gold-trimmed china and champagne flutes. A string quartet played something classical and unobtrusive in the corner, the notes weaving through the hum of conversation. Every detail screamed wealth, from the towering floral arrangements to the waiters circulating with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Daniel felt Martha stiffen beside him as they paused in the entrance. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on his arm. "You okay?" he murmured. She didn't look at him, her gaze sweeping the room with the sharp focus of someone assessing threats. "Just counting how many of these people have stepped over me on their way to brunch." A waiter approached with flutes of champagne. Daniel took two, handing one to Martha. "Drink this, it helps." She took a deliberate sip, her manicured nails contrasting against the glass. The emerald cocktail ring he'd insisted she wear caught the light. Tastes like money. That's the Dom Perignon talking. Across the room, a ripple of movement. Then Daniel. Sophia stood frozen near the champagne tower, her perfectly contoured face slack with shock. Her gaze darted from him to Martha, and back, her rose gold gown suddenly seeming garish next to Martha's understated elegance. Daniel felt Martha's arm tense again. He covered her hand with his. Showtime. The unraveling Martha moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it. When a society matron sniffed at her, Martha disarmed her with a wry comment about the flower arrangements. When Alexander's frat brother cousin tried to quiz her about what she did, she volleyed back with such dry wit that he wandered off looking confused. Daniel watched, equal parts impressed and ashamed that he'd expected anything less. Then came the moment he'd been waiting for. Darling, you must introduce me to your friend. Sophia materialized at his elbow, her smile brittle. Up close he could see the Botox-frozen tension around her eyes. Martha extended a hand. Martha Johnson. I'm Daniel's date. The emphasis on the last word was subtle but deliberate. Sophia's manicured fingers barely grazed Martha's before withdrawing. How lovely. Sophia's gaze flicked over Martha's dress, the appraisal thinly veiled. That's a remarkable gown. Valentino. Goodwill, Martha said cheerfully. You'd be amazed what people donate. The silence that followed was exquisite. The revelation that it happened during the salad course. An older gentleman at the next table kept staring at Martha. Finally, he stood, knocking over his wine glass in his haste. Martha Johnson, from Kings County Hospital. Martha's fork froze mid-bite. For the first time all evening, genuine emotion flashed across her face. Panic. Dr. Reynolds barreled on. Nurse Johnson. You delivered my grandson when the blizzard hit in 2016. The power was out, and you, please. Martha's voice was barely audible. Not here. The table had gone silent. Daniel watched as Martha's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing the woman beneath. Not a charity case or a prop, but someone with a history, with skills, with worth. Sophia's laugh rang out, sharp as broken glass. Oh, this is priceless. Daniel brought a war hero. Dr. Reynolds snapped. Nurse Johnson served 2 tours in Afghanistan before any of you spoiled brats earned your trust funds. The wedding planner chose that moment to announce the first dance. No one moved. The escape. They left during the cake cutting. Martha was silent in the elevator, her makeup still flawless, despite the tears she hadn't shed. Daniel didn't speak either, afraid of what might come out if he opened his mouth. The night air hit them like a slap. Martha stopped halfway down the block, her heels dangling from one hand. I was going to tell you, she said finally, about before. Daniel stared at the tail lights streaming past. I didn't ask. You didn't want to know. He had no defense for that. A cab pulled over, drawn by Martha's raised hand. She turned to him, the street lights catching the silver streaks in her hair, that the stylist had artfully concealed. Thank you for the dress, she said, and the whatever this was. Daniel watched the cab disappear into the night, his chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with Sophia. The limousine glided to a smooth stop beneath the awning of the Waldorf Astoria, its polished black surface reflecting the golden glow of the hotel's entrance. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the seat. He had attended countless high-profile events in venues like this, but tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't just Daniel Carter, successful businessman. Tonight he was Daniel Carter, the man who had been discarded, returning with a woman who would make Sophia question every choice she had ever made. Next to him, Martha sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. The emerald gown Lila had chosen for her draped elegantly over her frame, the fabric shimmering faintly under the interior lights of the car. The stylist had worked magic. Martha's hair, usually tied back in a practical knot, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and the subtle makeup enhanced the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. She looked every inch the sophisticated guest, not a woman who had been sleeping on the streets just days before. You ready for this? Daniel asked, his voice low. Martha turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. I've survived worse. There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet determination that made Daniel pause. He had expected nerves, hesitation, maybe even last-minute reluctance. But Martha Johnson was not a woman who backed down from a challenge. The driver opened the door, and Daniel stepped out first, offering his hand to Martha. She took it, her grip steady, and rose from the car with a grace that belied her circumstances. For a moment, they stood together at the base of the grand staircase leading to the ballroom, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting down to them.
Then, without a word, they ascended the grand entrance. The ballroom doors swung open and the hum of conversation dipped slightly as heads turned toward them. Daniel kept his expression neutral, but he didn't miss the way Sophia, standing near the champagne fountain with Alexander, went rigid at the sight of him. Her carefully curated smile faltered for just a second before she recovered, but it was enough. Martha, meanwhile, walked beside him as if she had been born into this world. Her posture was flawless, her gaze steady as she took in the opulence around her, the crystal chandeliers, the towering floral arrangements, the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. She didn't gawk or shrink back. She observed, assessed, and then dismissed it all with a slight tilt of her chin. A waiter glided past with a tray of champagne flutes. Daniel took two, handing one to Martha. "To making an impression," he murmured. She clinked her glass against his, her lips curving into a smirk. "Oh, we will." Sophia's approach. It didn't take long for Sophia to detach herself from Alexander and make her way over, her rose gold gown swishing around her legs. Up close, Daniel could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers clenched around her champagne flute just a little too tightly. "Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Wouldn't miss it," he replied smoothly. Her gaze flicked to Martha, and Daniel saw the exact moment Sophia's mask slipped, just a fraction, just enough to reveal the confusion beneath. This wasn't what she had expected. She had anticipated him arriving alone, or perhaps with some vapid socialite on his arm. Not this. Not a woman who carried herself like she belonged here more than Sophia ever could. "And who is your friend?" Sophia asked, the pause deliberate. Martha extended her hand before Daniel could respond. "Martha Johnson." Sophia's fingers barely grazed hers before withdrawing. "How lovely to meet you." Her eyes swept over Martha's dress, the appraisal thinly veiled. "That's a remarkable gown." "Valentino?" Martha smiled, slow and knowing. "Goodwill. You'd be amazed what people donate." The silence that followed was deafening. The unraveling as the evening progressed, Daniel watched with something akin to awe as Martha navigated the crowd. She was a natural, disarming the snide comments of society matrons with dry humor, deflecting prying questions with effortless grace. When Alexander's obnoxious cousin tried to grill her about what she did for a living, she merely raised an eyebrow and said, "No, The man had blinked, obviously. Reynolds, Daniel would later learn, had been staring at Martha throughout the first course. Then as the salads were being cleared, he stood abruptly, knocking over his wine glass in his haste. "Martha Johnson," he said, his voice carrying. "From Kings County Hospital." Martha's fork froze mid-bite. For the first time all evening, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Dr. Reynolds didn't seem to notice. Johnson. He delivered my grandson during the blizzard in 2016. The power was out. The roads were closed, and you... "Please," Martha interrupted, her voice low but firm. "Not here." But it was too late. The table had gone silent, and nearby guests were turning to stare. Sophia's laugh rang out, sharp and brittle. "Oh, this is priceless." "Daniel brought a war hero," Dr. Reynolds snapped, cutting her off. "Nurse Johnson served 2 tours in Afghanistan before any of you spoiled brats earned your trust funds." The silence that followed was absolute. The aftermath. They left shortly after, the weight of the revelation hanging between them. The limo ride back was quiet. Martha staring out the window.
Her profile unreadable in the green begin light.
Daniel didn't know what to say. He had brought her here as a prop, a tool for his own revenge. But Martha was so much more than that. A nurse, a veteran, a woman who had saved lives, and then been discarded by the same society that now celebrated her ex. When the car pulled up outside Martha's hotel, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the dress, for the night." Then she was gone, slipping out of the car and into the night without a backward glance. Daniel sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, wondering when exactly his plan had backfired so spectacularly. The silence in the limousine was thick enough to choke on. Daniel stared at the empty champagne flute in his hand.
The bubbles long gone, honey.
Martha sat motionless beside him, her gaze fixed on the passing city lights outside the window. The emerald dress that had made her look like royalty hours ago now seemed to weigh her down.
Fabric dulled under the beam, interior lighting.
Daniel cleared his throat. "Martha, don't." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Just don't." He snapped his mouth shut. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That he hadn't known? That if he'd realized who she was, he never would have? The lie tasted bitter even in his thoughts. The car pulled up to the luxury hotel where Martha had been staying temporarily. She reached for the door handle before the driver could open it.
Her movement sharp.
Daniel caught her wrist. "Wait." She froze but didn't turn around. "Let me help you," he said. The words sounded pathetic even to his own ears. Martha finally looked at him, her dark eyes gleaming with something that wasn't quite anger but wasn't forgiveness either.
"You already did, remember? Got me all dressed up for your big revenge fantasy."
She pulled her arm free. "We're square." Then she was gone, disappearing through the hotel's revolving doors before Daniel could form a response. The revelation Dr. Reynolds' words echoed in Daniel's skull all the way home. War hero, nurse, blizzard of 2016. He poured himself a whiskey the moment he entered his penthouse, the ice cubes clinking violently against the glass. A quick internet search confirmed what he already knew: the 2016 blizzard had been catastrophic. Hospitals running on backup generators, medical staff working 72-hour shifts, and one particular news story about a nurse who delivered a baby in a darkened elevator when the maternity ward lost power. The grainy hospital photo showed a younger Martha, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, but smiling as she cradled a newborn. Daniel drained his glass in one swallow. The search 3 days passed with no sign of Martha. The hotel reported she checked out that same night, leaving behind the designer clothes and jewelry. Daniel's calls to local shelters went unanswered. On the fourth morning, his assistant Emily appeared in his office doorway, holding a folded piece of paper. "You might want to see this." It was a printout of a GoFundMe page. Medical bills and housing for veteran nurse Martha Johnson. The photo showed the same woman from the news article. The fundraiser had been started by Dr. Reynolds. Daniel scanned the details: medical debt from her mother's cancer treatment, an eviction after missing record, "How much does she need?" he asked hoarsely. Emily hesitated. "The goal is 20,000, but pay it, all of it, anonymously." The confrontation: Martha found him anyway. Daniel was leaving his office building that evening when she materialized from the shadows near the parking garage, back in her worn coat but standing straighter than he remembered. "I knew it was you," she said without preamble. Daniel exhaled sharply. "How?" "Please." "Like random benefactors drop 20 grand every day." She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air. "Why?" The honest answer stuck in his throat. "Because I owe you. Because I'm ashamed. Because you deserve better than being my prop. Because it was the right thing to do," he settled on. Martha studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I'm paying you back." "Don't." "Not the money." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "This way." Daniel opened it to find a job offer for him. a position on the board of directors for a non-profit serving homeless veterans. The contact name was Dr. Reynolds. Martha turned to leave. Wait, Daniel called after her. The nursing license. Is there any way? She paused, but didn't look back. Some things can't be fixed with a check, Daniel. The aftermath. The fundraiser money cleared Martha's debts. Dr. Reynolds helped her secure transitional housing. But as Daniel learned through discreet inquiries, Martha refused to touch the remaining funds, directing them instead to a shelter for homeless women. He took the non-profit position, attended his first board meeting, listened to veterans' stories that made his comfortable life feel obscene. Meanwhile, Sophia's marriage imploded spectacularly before the honeymoon ended. The gossip blogs had a field day when Alexander was photographed with his missus. Daniel felt nothing. Winter turned to spring. Then one rainy April morning, Daniel arrived at work to find a familiar figure waiting in his office lobby. Martha stood near the windows, dry now but with rain still glistening in her curls. She wore scrubs under her open coat. Daniel's heart stuttered. You got your license back. Temporary probationary status. She held out a hand. They need a medical director at the new veterans clinic. Dr. Reynolds thinks you'd be good at fundraising. Daniel grasped her hand, feeling calluses that no amount of luxury could erase. Is this you paying me back? Martha's smile was the first real one he'd ever seen from her. Nah, this is me giving you a chance to do better. Outside, the rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The rain had stopped by the time Martha led Daniel through the glass doors of the new veterans clinic. The scent of fresh paint and antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee from the staff lounge. The walls were adorned with muted landscapes, a deliberate choice to create calm in a space meant for healing. Daniel hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit. Martha, now in light blue scrubs and a white coat, moved with purpose, her posture different from the guarded woman he had first met on the streets. Conference room is this way, she said, not looking back. He followed, passing open doors where staff members prepared for the clinic's soft opening the following week. A young nurse glanced up, did a double take at Martha, then grinned. Look at you, Dr. Johnson. Martha waved her off, but Daniel caught the slight flush of pride in her cheeks. The clinic tour. The facility was smaller than Daniel had expected, but efficiently designed. Martha pointed out the key areas: the intake desk with its trauma-informed design, the therapy rooms with soundproof walls, the quiet room for patients who needed a moment. Every detail had been carefully considered. Dr. Reynolds fought for the extra funding to make this happen, Martha explained as they walked. Most places just slap some VA posters on the wall and call it veteran-friendly. Daniel ran a hand along the curved edge of the reception desk. How many patients are you expecting? First week, maybe 20. By month's end if we do this right. She met his gaze. Hundreds. The weight of her words settled between them. This wasn't just a clinic. It was a second chance for the patients, for Martha, and perhaps, though neither would say it aloud, for Daniel himself. The board meeting. They found Dr. Reynolds in the conference room, surrounded by paperwork and half-empty coffee cups. The older man stood when they entered, his face breaking into a wide smile. Martha and Daniel, good, you're both here. He gestured to the chairs. We have much to discuss. For the next hour they reviewed budgets, staffing, and checks. Daniel contributed where he could, suggesting corporate sponsors, streamlining supply orders, but mostly he listened. Listened to Martha debate treatment protocols with the sharp clarity of someone who had lived through the system's failures. Listened to Dr. Reynolds speak of patients he treated decades ago whose names he still remembered. It was during a discussion about nighttime security that Martha dropped the bombshell. I want to start a street medicine program, she said, leaning forward. Teams that go out to homeless encampments, shelters, under bridges, anywhere veterans might be hiding. Dr. Reynolds stroked his chin. That's ambitious. It's necessary, Martha countered. You know as well as I do that the ones who need help most never walk through these doors. Daniel found himself speaking before he'd fully processed the thought. I'll fund it.
Both turned to stare at him. Not just the money, he continued. The idea taking shape. I'll go with you. Learn what you do. Help however I can. Martha studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. You'll need training. I'm a fast learner. Dr. Reynolds chuckled. Well then, seems we have our first volunteer. The first outreach 3 weeks later, Daniel found himself in a donated van loaded with medical supplies, wearing a navy blue windbreaker with the clinic's logo. Martha sat in the passenger seat, checking items off a clipboard. Remember, she said, as they pulled into an industrial area where makeshift tents lined the railroad tracks. Yes. We don't push, we don't judge, we offer. Daniel nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. The first stop was an older man named Carl, a Vietnam vet with a persistent cough. Martha knelt in the dirt beside his tent, speaking softly as she examined him. Daniel handed her supplies when asked, took notes when instructed, and mostly tried not to be in the way. It was at their fourth stop that reality hit. The young woman couldn't have been older than 25. Her arms were track-marked, her eyes hollow. When Martha asked about her service, she rattled off a Marine Corps unit number like a prayer. Daniel turned away under the pretense of reorganizing supplies. His vision blurred. These were America's heroes, discarded, forgotten. And he'd spent years obsessing over stock prices and petty revenge, while people like this woman slept in the dirt. A hand touched his shoulder. Martha stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Breathe, she murmured. Then get me the wound care kit. That night, Daniel sat in his luxury apartment staring at the city lights, seeing nothing but that young Marine's face. The transformation months passed. The clinic flourished. Daniel's initial financial support turned into hands-on involvement, attending case conferences, driving outreach vans, even taking night shifts when staffing ran short. Sophia called once, drunk and nostalgic. He listened politely, then excused himself to return to a grant proposal. One rainy Thursday, Martha found him restocking supply cabinets. You're getting good at this, she remarked, watching him organize the bin. Daniel snorted. Don't sound so surprised. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I am though. Their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them, an acknowledgement of how far they'd both come, and how much further there was to go. The dedication at the clinic's 1-year anniversary celebration. Daniel stood before a crowd of staff, patients, and local officials. A year ago, he began, his voice steady. I thought I was here to help others. What I didn't realize was that I was the one who needed saving. His gaze found Martha in the front row. She wore her white coat, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No emerald gown could have made her more radiant. This clinic isn't just about medical care, he continued. It's about remembering that no one is beyond redemption. Not our patients, not our staff, and certainly not me. Later, as the crowd mingled over cake, Martha approached. Not bad for a finance guy. Daniel handed her a plate. I had a good teacher. She took a bite of frosting, then said casually, we're expanding to the Bronx next month. Could use someone who knows how to talk to bureaucrats. Daniel smiled. Just try to stop me. The future stretched before them, uncertain but bright, a road neither could have imagined. When they first met on that cold street corner, and for the first time in years, Daniel Carter felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.